77 people were already dead. They just did not know it yet. No flight controls. No steering. No hope. Just falling toward the deepest part of the Atlantic, 5 miles of black water below. Then military Black Hawks heard 5 words on the radio that should have been impossible. Call sign wave. Not today. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The airport terminal smelled like old coffee and cleaning liquid. You were sitting in a plastic chair in Cargo Terminal 7 at JFK Airport in New York, holding your boarding pass and looking at your phone. It was 11:05 at night on a Friday in March. The lights above you were the kind of harsh white fluorescent lights that make everyone look tired. And everyone here did look tired. You checked your boarding pass again. Seat 18D. Atlantic Cargo Flight 229. Destination, Shannon, Ireland. Ticket price, $200. $200 to cross the Atlantic Ocean. You knew exactly why it was so cheap. This was not a normal passenger flight. This was a cargo plane, a Boeing 767 freighter, that had been specially modified in its rear section to carry up to 80 paying passengers alongside the freight. The seats were real airline seats, but they were bolted directly to the cargo floor. There was no in-flight entertainment. No food service. No blankets. No Wi-Fi. Just a seat, 2 engines, and 8 hours of dark ocean stretching below you all the way to Ireland. But you needed cheap. And this was about as cheap as flying across the Atlantic could get. Around 80 people were waiting in the terminal with you. You could see from their faces and their bags that most of them were students. Young people with large backpacks, wearing university sweatshirts, probably heading home or heading somewhere new. There were also a few older travelers who looked like they had chosen budget over comfort many times before and were completely comfortable with that choice. A young couple sat close together, sharing one set of earphones, watching something on a phone screen. An old Irish man in a flat wool cap had fallen deeply asleep in his chair, his mouth slightly open, completely unbothered by the noise of the terminal around him. Budget travelers. People who understood that cheap sometimes means basic, and basic is fine when you have somewhere to be. You pulled out your book. 8 hours was a long time and you planned to read through most of it. At 11:05 p.m. exactly, the gate agent called the flight for boarding. She was a tired-looking woman in her 40s who had clearly done this same announcement hundreds of times and had stopped finding it interesting. Everyone shuffled forward. You joined the line, showed your boarding pass, walked out through a heavy door and across a concrete apron in the cold March night air, and climbed metal stairs up into the back section of a 767 freighter. The inside of the aircraft was strange compared to a normal passenger jet. If you walked forward from the passenger section, you hit a solid metal wall, and behind that wall was pure cargo, heavy freight containers locked and strapped to the floor all the way to the nose of the aircraft. The passenger section in the back had 10 rows of standard airline seats, 8 across each row, with a narrow aisle down the middle. The overhead bins were real overhead bins. The seatbelts were real seatbelts. The windows were normal oval windows. But the carpet was thin and gray, the lighting was plain and bright, and there was no screen on the seat back in front of you, no menu, no blanket in a plastic bag. Just a seat and a safety card in the pocket. You found row 18, seat D, which was a middle seat on the left side of the aircraft. You put your bag in the overhead bin, sat down, buckled your belt, and opened your book. That was when you noticed her. She came up the boarding stairs a few minutes after you sat down. She was in her late 30s. Athletic build, the kind of lean and fit that comes from years of real physical work, not gym workouts. Her dark hair was cut very short, almost military short. She was wearing worn cargo pants, old scuffed boots, and a faded navy blue t-shirt. Written on the t-shirt in cracked white letters were the words, Helicopter SEA Combat Squadron 8. She was carrying 2 things. The first was a backpack that was battered and worn in a very specific way, the kind of wear that comes from being carried in rough conditions, from being dropped on hard surfaces, from years of real hard use in places that most backpacks never go. The second thing was a small wooden box, about 8 inches square, smooth and sealed. She carried the box in both hands carefully, the way you carry something that is fragile, or precious, or both. She moved through the cabin differently from everyone else. There was a quality to how she walked and turned and found her row that was hard to name exactly. She did not bump into seat backs. She did not fumble with her overhead bin. She moved with complete awareness of exactly where her body was in the space around her. Military bearing. That was the phrase for it, though you did not think of it in those exact words at the time. She found seat 12B, the window seat 6 rows ahead of you, and sat down. She placed the wooden box carefully on her lap. Then she took noise-canceling headphones from her backpack, put them on, leaned her head back against the headrest, and closed her eyes. Her hands rested still on the armrests for a moment. Then they began to move. Small movements. Very precise. Very deliberate. Her fingers would shift slightly in a specific pattern, pause, then shift again. Her right hand would close around an invisible grip, hold for exactly 2 seconds, then release. Her left thumb moved in a small controlled circle. Her fingers pressed down on nothing, held, released. Over and over, the same small careful sequences. You watched her for a moment, curious. It looked like she was practicing something. Running through some kind of checklist or procedure with her hands, the way a musician silently practices fingering, or a student mentally rehearses a speech. The movements were technical and methodical, like someone going through a sequence they had done 10,000 times. You thought, veteran. Probably has some difficult memories. Flying cheap to get somewhere far from whatever she is carrying around. You went back to your book. You had no idea her name was Jessica Martinez. You had no idea her call sign was Wave. You had no idea she was one of 8 people in the entire world trained to land a commercial aircraft with no working flight controls. You had absolutely no idea that in 2 hours and 17 minutes, she would be the only reason anyone on this flight was still breathing. At 11:32 p.m., the cargo door closed with a deep metallic thud. The CF6 turbofan engine started up, beginning with a high electronic whine that built steadily into a deep and powerful roar that you felt more than heard. The aircraft pushed back from the terminal, slowly at first, then rolling through the cold night toward the runways. Most passengers were already settling in with books or headphones. The old Irish man had not woken up since boarding. The 767 turned onto runway 31L and stopped. For several seconds it sat still, the engines building power, the whole airframe vibrating with controlled energy. Then the brakes released and you were moving, faster and faster, the runway lights blurring past the windows, and then the nose lifted and the ground dropped away and Atlantic Cargo Flight 229 climbed into the New York night sky, banking east over the dark and endless Atlantic Ocean. For 2 hours and 17 minutes, everything was completely normal. Before we talk about what happened at 1:49 in the morning, you need to understand who was sitting in seat 12B with that wooden box on her lap. Jessica Martinez grew up in San Antonio, Texas. Her father was a mechanic and her mother was a schoolteacher, and she was the youngest of 4 children. From the age of 12 she had exactly one obsession in her life, and that obsession was flying helicopters. Not passenger jets. Not small private planes. Helicopters specifically, because of how they could hover perfectly still, how they could move in any direction, how they could operate in tight spaces and low altitudes that no fixed-wing aircraft could reach. Something about all of that fascinated her completely and never stopped fascinating her. She graduated from Texas A&M University with a degree in aerospace engineering, joined the U.S. Navy on a flight scholarship, and went to flight school at Naval Air Station Pensacola in Florida. She finished in the top 15% of her class of 42 students, which was good enough to be selected for helicopter training, and she was assigned to fly the MH-60S Seahawk, a large twin-engine military helicopter used for everything from moving cargo between ships to pulling wounded soldiers out of combat zones to searching for and rescuing pilots who had gone down in the ocean. Her first deployment was on the USS Ronald Reagan aircraft carrier in 2011, in the Pacific Ocean. She was 24 years old. The first time she landed on the moving deck of that carrier, coming down onto a strip of steel that was pitching and rolling in Pacific swells while her own helicopter was moving and the wind was constantly shifting, she felt, clearly and completely, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be in the world. She was very good at this. Not just technically good, though she was technically excellent. She was good in a deeper way that is harder to learn and cannot really be taught. She could read the ocean. She could feel the rhythm of how the carrier was moving through the swells and time her approach and her descent so precisely that her wheels touched the deck cleanly even in conditions that forced other pilots to go around and wait. In rough weather, when sea states were high and the carrier deck was rising and falling dramatically, when other pilots were waving off and circling until conditions improved, Wave was landing. That was where the call sign came from. Wave. Because she could land in waves that nobody else would attempt. Because the ocean moving beneath her did not stop her. Because she came back, always came back, like a wave comes back to the shore no matter what. Over 12 years she flew off carriers and deployed to 3 different conflict areas. She accumulated 3,400 flight hours. 178 carrier landings. 89 combat missions. She was involved in search and rescue operations that saved 11 lives. She evacuated wounded soldiers under fire in conditions that earned her 2 air medals. In 2018 she was forced to ditch a burning helicopter in the Arabian Sea at night, bringing it down onto the water when it was on fire and one engine had failed, and she kept all 4 of her crew alive and floating in the darkness for 6 full hours until a rescue team arrived. For that she received the Navy Commendation Medal. In 2019, she was selected for something called Project Poseidon. The program was classified, which meant she could not discuss it publicly. But the basic concept behind it had come from a very specific question that Navy engineers and experienced pilots had asked after studying the famous miracle on the Hudson in January of 2009. That was the incident where Captain Chesley Sullenberger had safely landed U.S. Airways Flight 1549 on the surface of the Hudson River in New York after both engines were destroyed by a bird strike. Everyone had survived. It was considered one of the most extraordinary emergency landings in aviation history. But the Navy team had asked a harder question. Sullenberger had working flight controls the whole time. He could move his ailerons to keep the wings level. He could move the elevator to control the angle of the nose. He could flare, meaning raise the nose at the last second before impact to slow the aircraft down and reduce the rate of descent. That was a huge part of why people survived. The impact was survivable because the aircraft was going slowly and the angle was right. But what if the hydraulic systems had failed too? What if the controls had been dead? What if Sullenberger had engines but nothing else, no way to steer, no flaps to slow down, no elevator to adjust the nose angle? The honest answer was that in those conditions the aircraft would have hit the water at full speed at a very bad angle and everyone would have died instantly. Project Poseidon was designed to change that answer. For 9 months, at Naval Air Station Patuxent River in Maryland, a team of 8 specially selected pilots, including Wave, learned to fly deliberately disabled aircraft using only engine power. Differential thrust for turning, which meant adding power to one engine to push the nose in that direction. Careful, gradual changes in total engine power to control the rate of descent. Ground effect, which is the way air gets compressed between a large wing and a flat surface when they are close together, creating extra lift that can slow a fall in the final seconds before impact. These were techniques that no civilian pilot was trained in, that no commercial aviation program covered. The engineers said it was theoretically possible. Wave and the other 7 pilots proved it was practically possible. Wave herself made 23 successful water landings in Chesapeake Bay, landing aircraft that had been deliberately disabled, aircraft with locked controls and dead hydraulics and non-functioning flaps. The engineers watching from the shore said the aircraft could not be controlled. Wave controlled them. She was the best pilot in the program. By a significant margin. She was being prepared to become the program's chief instructor, to teach everything she had learned to the next generation of Navy pilots, when her final deployment ended everything. Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. A medical evacuation mission. Her MH-60S Seahawk went in to pull out 3 wounded Marines from a compound outside the city. The approach was clean. The extraction went well. They had the Marines loaded and the wheels were coming up as they climbed away from the compound. Then the ground fire started. Most of the rounds hit the airframe without doing critical damage. But one single piece of metal shrapnel from one round, came through the lower edge of the windscreen on the co-pilot's side and struck Lieutenant David Chen in the throat. David Chen was 29 years old. He had been Wave's co-pilot for 18 months. He was 2 years out of flight school, already one of the most talented young pilots she had ever flown with, and in 18 months of flying dangerous missions together they had developed the easy, wordless working partnership that only forms between people who have trusted each other with their lives repeatedly. She thought of him as a younger brother. She was teaching him everything she knew. He was dead within 40 seconds of being hit. Wave flew the aircraft back to base. She flew it back with one hand on the controls and one hand pressing hard on his throat trying to stop the bleeding, already knowing it was too late but unable to stop trying. She landed on the pad. She got the 3 wounded Marines into the hands of the trauma team. She was still sitting in the cockpit when the medical team told her David was gone. She was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for completing the mission. 8 months after that day, she submitted her formal resignation from the Navy. She could not fully explain it even to herself. She was not having breakdowns. She was not unable to function. But every time she sat in a cockpit, every time she put on a helmet, she saw David's face. She ran through every decision she had made that day, the approach angle she had chosen, the speed she had flown at, the specific path she had taken out of the compound, wondering if a different choice would have meant that piece of shrapnel went through the air where his head was not. Rationally she understood that this kind of thinking was not fair to herself. Every experienced pilot she spoke to told her the same thing. The inquiry found no fault in her decisions. Ground fire is random. You cannot protect against every variable. She knew all of that. She felt something else entirely. So she resigned. She moved back to San Antonio. She tried to be a civilian. She tried to figure out who Jessica Martinez was when she was not Lieutenant Commander Wave, when she was not the pilot, when she was not the person other people depended on to bring them home. 8 months of trying. And now it was March, and she was on this cargo flight to Ireland, carrying David's ashes in that small wooden box. His family had called her 6 weeks ago. His mother, a quiet woman from County Galway who had moved to Virginia 30 years before, had asked Wave if she would take David's ashes to Ireland. He had talked about Ireland his whole life, his mother said. He had wanted to go and never gotten the chance. Would Wave please take him? Wave had said yes immediately, without hesitation, because saying yes to something for David was the one thing that still felt clear. She had chosen this cargo flight because it was the cheapest available. She was trying, consciously and deliberately, to avoid anything that reminded her of her Navy life. A cheap cargo flight where she could sit quietly and look out a window and not think about aviation felt like the right choice. She was just going to be a passenger. The aircraft was not going to let her. 1:49 am in the cockpit of Atlantic Cargo Flight 229, everything had been completely routine for over 2 hours. Captain Michael Torres was 48 years old with 15,000 flight hours and 22 years of experience. He was a careful, professional pilot with the calm that comes from having flown through enough difficult situations that routine problems no longer created any anxiety in him. First Officer Sarah Chen was 34 years old with 6,800 flight hours, technically excellent and good under pressure. They worked well together. 2 hours into a smooth Atlantic crossing, with clear skies and light winds and the autopilot holding their altitude steadily at 38,000 feet, they were about as relaxed as two professionals working a night shift can be. Torres was going through fuel calculations for the descent into Shannon. Chen was monitoring the flight system's display, checking temperatures and pressures and performance numbers in the methodical way that good pilots do even when everything is clearly normal. At 1:47 a.m., Chen noticed something. It was subtle. A very slight delay in control response when she made a small correction through the autopilot. Just a tiny lag that was not quite right. She tested it again. Mike. Controls feel a little heavy. Torres took the manual controls briefly. Moved the yoke left, then right. There was a definite sluggishness. Like pushing through something thicker than air should be. Yeah. Check hydraulic pressure. The Boeing 767 has 3 completely independent hydraulic systems. This design exists specifically because of safety. If one system fails, you have 2 more. If somehow 2 fail, you still have 1. The statistical probability of all 3 failing at the same time was, in any normal scenario, essentially 0. Aviation engineers had calculated this probability many times. It was not a scenario that the emergency procedures manual covered in any detail, because it was not considered a realistic possibility. Chen turned to the hydraulic panel. System 1 pressure dropping. 2000 psi, 1500, 1000. Switch to System 2. System 2 is also dropping. Mike, System 3 is falling too. We are losing all 3 hydraulic systems. The words landed in the cockpit like a physical thing. Losing all 3 systems simultaneously. Impossible under normal circumstances. Which meant this was not a normal circumstance. Something had attacked all 3 systems at once, something systemic. What had actually happened, as investigators would later determine, was this. During pre-flight servicing at JFK, a container of hydraulic fluid that was used to top up all 3 of the aircraft's hydraulic reservoirs had been contaminated with microscopic metal particles. Fine metallic shavings from a corroded storage tank that had not been maintained properly. The particles were invisible to the naked eye. The fluid looked and smelled and tested completely normal. But as the fluid circulated through the aircraft's hydraulic systems during the 2 hours of flight, those tiny metal particles acted like sandpaper against the rubber seals inside every hydraulic pump and actuator in the aircraft. 2 hours of that, and every seal in every system had been destroyed. All 3 hydraulic systems read 0. Every flight control on a 767 is hydraulically powered. The ailerons that bank the wings. The elevator that raises and lowers the nose. The rudder that turns the aircraft left and right. The flaps that slow the aircraft for landing. The spoilers. The brakes. Every single one of these required hydraulic pressure to move. Without that pressure, they were frozen in their current position. They could not move at all. Torres moved the yoke. There was absolutely no response. The aircraft did not react. He pushed the rudder pedals. Nothing. He tried emergency procedures from memory and from the checklist, one after another. Emergency hydraulic activation. Manual backup systems. Ram air turbine deployment. He worked through everything methodically and professionally, which was exactly the right thing to do and also completely ineffective, because there was no hydraulic fluid to pressurize. The seals were gone. The autopilot disconnected with a loud warning tone and a flashing red light, because it had detected that its control inputs were producing no response from the aircraft. Without the autopilot and without any ability to correct the aircraft's attitude manually, the aerodynamic forces acting on the 767 at that moment began to have their way. The nose pitched very gradually down. The aircraft began to descend. 3,000 feet per minute. Torres broadcast the emergency. Mayday, 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 this is Atlantic Cargo 229, we have total hydraulic failure, total loss of flight controls, uncontrolled descent, current altitude 37,000 descending, position 47 north, 41 west, 79 souls on board, requesting immediate assistance. Chen looked at the descent indicator. Then she looked at Torres. If we cannot flare on touchdown we will hit the water at over 180 knots. That is not survivable. I know. We have approximately 11 minutes before impact. I know. Is there anything we have not tried? No. Torres kept working through the checklist because that was what a professional pilot does even when he knows it is not going to work. No. There is nothing. In seat 12B, Wave's eyes opened. She had felt the descent begin. Had felt the very slight change in the angle of the aircraft, the subtle shift in how the cabin was oriented relative to gravity. She had felt the change in engine sound that happens when an autopilot disconnects and the aircraft's relationship with its own controls is suddenly different. She sat perfectly still for about 10 seconds, feeling and listening. Uncontrolled descent. She knew what that meant without needing to be told. Flight control failure. Which meant hydraulic loss. She listened to both engines. Both running. Both producing power. The aircraft had propulsion. It had no steering, no braking, no way to configure for a landing. But it had propulsion. That was all she needed. She thought about the wooden box on her lap. She thought about David's mother, who had asked her to scatter his ashes in Ireland, and her promise, and the fact that she could not keep a promise from the bottom of the Puerto Rico trench. She took a long slow breath. She put David's box carefully in the storage pocket of the seat in front of her, where it would be safer than on her lap. She unbuckled her seatbelt. She stood up. The passengers in the rows around 12B watched the woman from the window seat stand up. There was something about how she moved through the cabin toward the front that was different from the confused and frightened movement of the other passengers, who had started to feel the descent and sense that something was not right. She was moving with direction. With purpose. Like she was going somewhere specific to do something specific. She walked to the cockpit intercom phone mounted on the forward galley wall, picked it up, and pressed the call button. Captain Torres. This is Lieutenant Commander Jessica Martinez, U.S. Navy, retired. I am a passenger in seat 12B. Call sign Wave. I know that you have lost all hydraulic pressure and that your flight controls are not responding. I know how to land this aircraft without them. Open the cockpit door. You have approximately 10 minutes. In the cockpit, Torres and Chen looked at each other. Torres keyed the intercom back. Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but... Captain. Her voice was completely calm. Not the forced calm of someone controlling fear, but real calm. I flew MH-60S Seahawk helicopters off aircraft carriers for 12 years. I have 47 emergency landings on my record, including 6 successful water landings. I was selected for and completed a classified U.S. Navy program called Project Poseidon, which trains pilots specifically to ditch aircraft with total hydraulic failure using only engine thrust for control. I have made 23 successful thrust-only water landings in Chesapeake Bay in disabled aircraft. I am one of 8 people alive who are trained for exactly what is happening to your aircraft right now. You have 9 minutes and 50 seconds. Please open the door. A silence of about 4 seconds. Chen said quietly to Torres, she knows the right terminology. Thrust-only landing. Project Poseidon. She is not guessing any of this. Torres thought for one more second. Then he reached forward and pressed the cockpit door release. Wave came in 30 seconds later. She moved straight to the observer jump seat behind and between the 2 pilots and sat down. She looked at the instrument panel in one single sweeping scan, the way a doctor looks at a patient all at once before focusing on any specific thing. 0 hydraulic pressure on all 3 gauges. Both engines at cruise power. Altitude 33,000 feet and descending. Descent rate 2,800 feet per minute. Airspeed 272 knots. She processed all of this in about 3 seconds. Fuel state, she said. 42%, Torres answered. About 4 hours of flight time. Good. What is our position exactly? We are directly over the Puerto Rico Trench. Deepest part of the Atlantic. Ocean floor at 28,000 feet below us. Water temperature at the surface? 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Nearest rescue asset? Coast Guard has been notified. They are scrambling helicopters from Bermuda. Estimated arrival time 3 hours minimum. Wave sat with this information for a moment. The math was not good. 39-degree water. Without a survival suit, hypothermia becomes a serious threat within 60 to 90 minutes for most adults. 3 hours until rescue. That meant even if she successfully ditched the aircraft and everyone survived the impact, they needed to keep 79 people alive in near-freezing water for at least an hour longer than most of them could survive unassisted. Survivable. Barely. If everything went right. Here is the situation, Wave said. A conventional water ditching is not possible because we cannot flare, cannot use flaps to slow down, cannot configure the aircraft in any way. If we fly this aircraft into the ocean the way it is right now, it will hit at over 180 knots at a very bad angle and no one in the back will survive the impact. So we are going to do something different. What? Torres said. We are going to use differential engine thrust to steer this aircraft and control our descent rate. We are going to use the ground effect that builds between the wings and the water surface in the final moments to slow our descent naturally. And we are going to put this aircraft on the water at approximately 160 knots, which is fast but which the structure of the 767 can survive, and which will give passengers a real chance of surviving the impact if they are properly braced. Chen said, has this been done in a 767? No. Has it been done in any commercial aircraft? No. It has been done in 6 different military aircraft types in controlled test conditions. The physics are the same regardless of aircraft type. Actually, larger wings produce stronger ground effect, which works in our favor here. Torres said, what is the probability this works? Wave paused. She believed in being honest about this kind of question. Without this approach, the probability of anyone surviving is essentially 0. With this approach, executed correctly, I estimate 8 to 12% probability of the ditching being successful. Those are not good odds. But they are better than 0, and right now 0 is the only other option. Torres absorbed this. What do you need from us? I need you both to follow my instructions exactly, immediately, and without hesitation, even when what I am asking seems counterintuitive. I need you to trust me the way you would trust your training. I am not guessing. I have done this before. I am trained for this specific scenario. Can you do that? Torres said, yes. Chen said, yes. Good. First, let me talk to the passengers. Hand me the PA. Torres passed her the public address handset. Wave pressed the button. Her voice came through every speaker in the rear cabin, calm and clear and carrying a quality that made people stop talking and stop moving and listen. This is Lieutenant Commander Jessica Martinez speaking from the cockpit. I am a former U.S. Navy pilot and I am assisting the flight crew. I am going to tell you exactly what is happening and exactly what you need to do. Please listen carefully because these instructions will determine whether you survive. We have lost all flight controls due to a hydraulic system failure. We cannot fly this aircraft to an airport. We are going to make an emergency water landing on the Atlantic Ocean in approximately 8 minutes. I have performed water landings before. The crew and I are going to put this aircraft on the water as carefully as possible. But I need you to do your part. Right now, reach under your seat and take out the life vest. Put it on now. Do not inflate it. You inflate it only after you are outside the aircraft. Inflating it inside the aircraft will trap you. Remove your shoes. Remove your glasses if you have them. Take anything sharp out of your pockets, keys, pens, anything with hard edges. When I give the brace command, I want you head down with your hands locked behind your neck, feet flat on the floor in front of you. Stay in that position until the aircraft has completely stopped moving. After we are on the water, exit through the overwing emergency exits. Do not try to get your bags. Help the people around you. If someone near you is hurt, help them to the exit. Once you are in the water, stay together. Link arms with the people next to you. Keep moving your arms and legs. Talk to each other. Keep each other awake. Rescue is coming. We need to survive in the water for approximately 3 hours. 8 minutes. Follow these instructions and we will all get through this. Prepare now. She put down the handset and turned back to the instruments. In the rear cabin there was a very brief and total silence. Then Maya Patel in row 14 seat A reached under her seat with both hands and found her life vest and pulled it out. And one by one, row by row, everyone followed. Altitude 30,000 feet, Chen called. Descent rate 2,600 feet per minute. Airspeed 265. We need to slow the descent first, Wave said. Advance both throttles to 95% power. Smoothly. Torres pushed both throttles forward. The engine sound deepened. The descent rate began to decrease. 2,600. 2,200. 1,800. Good. Hold it there. We are still descending but much more slowly. That gives us time to set up properly for the ditching. The aircraft had started a very slow rightward bank, drifting off wings level because of some slight aerodynamic imbalance that would normally have been corrected automatically by the ailerons. Increase left engine power by 2%, Wave said. Torres moved the left throttle forward 2 small notches. The aircraft responded, the left wing dropping slightly then coming back to level. Good. Feel that? Small corrections. The aircraft will respond to differential thrust. It is slow and it is imprecise, but we can keep it flying straight and level. You have good hands, Captain. Use them. For the next 4 minutes, Wave talked Torres and Chen through the process of controlling the 767 with engine power alone. When the right wing started to drop, more left engine power. When the nose pitched too far down, both engines up together. When the speed was building too fast, both engines back slightly. Constant small adjustments, none of them large, all of them deliberate. It was not flying in any normal sense. It was more like steering a very large and very slow boat, making corrections that took several seconds to produce an effect, always working slightly ahead of where the aircraft actually was. But the aircraft was manageable. Barely, imprecisely, but manageable. At 20,000 feet, Wave said, start reducing power gradually. I want us at 170 knots when we enter ground effect. Reduce by 1% every 20 seconds. Torres began easing the throttles back. The airspeed decreased. 240. 230. 220. At 15,000 feet, Wave picked up the PA handset one more time. 2 minutes to water contact. Brace position now. Head down. Hands locked behind your neck. Feet flat. Stay in this position until we stop moving. Do it right now. She put down the handset. Altitude 15,000. Speed 210. Descent rate 1,500. Good. We are on track. Keep reducing power gradually. At 10,000 feet the descent rate was 1,200 feet per minute and the airspeed was 200 knots, and Wave could feel from the way the aircraft was behaving that the plan was working. The 767 was controllable. Not easy and not comfortable, but controllable. At 5,000 feet, she leaned forward and looked out the windscreen. Complete darkness. No moon. No stars visible through the cloud cover they had descended into. No horizon. The ocean was there somewhere below them, vast and black, but there was nothing to see it by. "Can you see the water?" Torres asked. "Not yet. But I will feel it before we see it. When we get down to about 200 feet, the air will compress between the wings and the ocean surface and the aircraft will respond differently. I will tell you when." "What do we do when you tell us?" "Reduce power to 60%. Smoothly and exactly. And then we trust physics. At 2,000 feet, descent rate 1100, airspeed 185. Reduce to 70% power on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark." Both throttles came back. The descent rate jumped to 1,400 feet per minute. The airspeed dropped. 175. "It is descending faster," Chen said, and her voice was tight. "I know. Wait. 1,000 feet." The blackness ahead was absolute. Torres had turned on every landing light the aircraft had, and they showed nothing but dark air and the occasional wisp of cloud. 500 feet. "Still 1,400 feet per minute," Chen said. "Wait. 300 feet. Wave felt it. It was subtle but unmistakable to someone who had felt it 23 times before. A slight change in how the aircraft sat in the air. A tiny reduction in the rate of descent that was not coming from the engines. The air being compressed between the wings and the ocean surface, building pressure, creating lift. Ground effect. Building gently but clearly. There. Feel that? That is ground effect starting. The wings are finding the cushion. The descent rate slowed. 1,400. 1,200. 1,000. Speed 168, Chen said, and there was something different in her voice now. Something that had not been there before, something almost like wonder. 200 feet. The water was still invisible. 100 feet. Torres said. Final power reduction. 60%. Both throttles together. Smoothly. Now. Both throttles came back together in one smooth, coordinated movement. The aircraft seemed to hang. Just for a single extraordinary second, the 767 sat 50 feet above the North Atlantic, balanced between the compressed air beneath its wings and the pull of gravity, moving at 162 knots over water that was 28,000 feet deep. In that second, Wave thought of David. She thought, I promised. And then the belly hit the water. The sound and the feeling of the impact hit every person in the aircraft simultaneously. It was not like anything that can be described accurately without having experienced it. Not an explosion but a deep, brutal, total body deceleration, the belly of the aircraft connecting with the surface of the Atlantic at 160 knots, and the ocean resisting, and the massive forward momentum of 200 tons of aircraft and cargo fighting against that resistance. The aircraft skipped. The belly hit, the nose bounced up, and for half a second the 767 was airborne again, and then the nose came down and the belly hit the second time, harder than the first, and the aircraft dug into the ocean surface and decelerated violently and the water came over the windscreen in a massive white wall. Every passenger was thrown hard against their restraints. Overhead bins burst open and things flew through the air. The cabin lights went out and the emergency amber lighting came on, painting everything in a dim yellow glow. Multiple people were screaming. The aircraft shook and groaned and scraped across the water surface. And then it stopped. For one complete second, there was absolute silence except for the hissing of water and the slowing of the engines. Then the water began to come in. The forward cargo door had failed on impact, a breach in the aircraft structure exactly as Wave had known it would. Cold Atlantic water was already flowing in through the front of the aircraft, pooling on the cargo floor, running back toward the passenger section. Wave was out of the jump seat before the aircraft had fully stopped. Get on the radio, she told Torres. Give our exact position every 2 minutes until the radio fails. That is your job. Do not leave the cockpit until it is underwater. She was through the cockpit door and into the passenger cabin in 3 seconds. The scene was controlled chaos. The amber emergency lighting showed passengers in brace position just beginning to look up, some already moving, some frozen with shock, some trying to help people around them. The water was already 5 inches deep at the front of the cabin and moving fast. Wave stopped in the aisle and raised her voice above the noise. Overwing exits. Move now. Help each other. Life vests on, but do not inflate until you are outside. The cabin crew, 2 of them, had the overwing emergency exits open within seconds. That was their training and they performed it perfectly. The exits opened onto the wings of the aircraft, which were still above the water surface, and passengers began moving toward them. Wave moved through the cabin in the rising water. She was not helping from the front, directing the general flow. She was moving through the chaos, finding the specific people who needed specific help. She found an elderly woman in row 16 whose seatbelt had jammed in the impact, the buckle locked. Wave pulled the emergency manual release and got her free and on her feet. She found a young man in row 13 who was sitting completely still in rising water, locked in shock, staring at nothing with blank eyes. She put her hands on both sides of his face and made him look at her directly. "What is your name?" He blinked. "James. James. I need you to walk to the exit. Right now. It is 6 rows forward. Can you walk?" "Yes." "Then walk. I am behind you." She guided him to the exit and then turned back. The water was 18 inches deep now and rising steadily. She heard a child crying and located the sound in row 11. A boy, 8 or 9 years old, standing in the aisle in water up to his knees, holding a small stuffed toy, crying. No adult with him. Separated in the evacuation. Wave picked him up and carried him to the exit, spotted a woman 40 feet away in the water outside screaming his name, and passed the boy to the cabin crew to get him to his mother. A woman in row 15 had broken her left arm in the impact, the bone clearly broken from the angle at which she was holding it. Wave got her life vest on her and properly secured, got her to the exit, confirmed there was someone in the water ready to take her, and made sure she went out safely. She walked the entire cabin one more time, through water now up to her thighs, checking every row. Empty. 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 All out. She climbed over the last seat back, reached the overwing exit and stepped onto the wing. Then she stepped off the wing into the Atlantic Ocean. The cold hit her like a physical blow from every direction at once. 39-degree water, nearly freezing, surrounded her completely. Every muscle in her body contracted. Her breathing went fast and ragged. Her skin registered the temperature as pure pain. She went under briefly and came back up, gasping. She controlled it. She had trained for cold water immersion. She had been through cold water immersion drills more times than she could count. She breathed through it deliberately, forcing slow deep breaths, letting her body begin its adjustment. The pain did not go away, but it became manageable. She looked around. 79 people in the North Atlantic. Middle of the night. Water 39 degrees. 3 hours until rescue. She started swimming. Wave moved through the survivors with a clear plan in her head. Organization was survival. Groups were warmer than individuals. Leadership within groups was what kept people from giving up. She had learned all of this in survival training and she had practiced all of it in real situations and she knew exactly what needed to happen. Groups of 10. Find 9 other people around you and stay together. Link your arms together. Like this, arm through arm, a chain. Do it now. She demonstrated. People copied her. The linking of arms did 2 things. It shared body heat between people. And it meant that if someone started to lose consciousness, the people linked to them would feel it immediately and could act. Every group needs one person who is in charge. One person who will keep talking, keep checking on everyone, keep the group together. Who is the leader of this group? In group after group, someone stepped forward. Not always a confident or experienced person. Sometimes a teenager, sometimes an older woman, sometimes a man who was shaking hard with cold but raised his hand anyway because someone had to. Maya Patel was in the water with 9 strangers. She was 21 years old, a student, soaking wet and shaking in the Atlantic, and Wave swam to her group. Who is the leader here? Nobody moved. Someone step up. Right now. Maya raised her hand. Good. Name? Maya. Maya, your job is simple. Keep these 9 people talking. Keep them moving their arms and legs. If anyone stops responding, shake them hard and make noise. Do not let anyone go quiet. Can you do that? I think so. Not I think so. Can you do it? Maya looked at the 9 people around her. Looked back at Wave. Yes. I can do it. Good. Then do it. Wave swam to the next group. She covered the entire survivor area over the next 20 minutes, checking every group, assigning leaders, demonstrating how to keep arms and legs moving, explaining why it mattered and what it would do for survival time. She sang part of a ridiculous old Navy song at the top of her voice at one point and people laughed, which was the point, because laughing meant breathing hard and breathing hard meant staying conscious and staying conscious meant staying alive. Captain Torres came out of the cockpit when the water in the aircraft reached his chest. He was a strong swimmer and immediately organized the 6 survivors who were closest to him into a linked group, taking the leadership role naturally. First Officer Chen, who had first aid training, spent the first hour moving between groups identifying and providing basic assistance to the more seriously injured survivors. 1 hour passed. Then 2 hours. The water was 39 degrees but people were staying together and moving and talking. Wave kept moving through the groups constantly, never stopping, making sure every person was awake and responding. When someone started going glassy-eyed with hypothermia, she made them answer questions. What is your name? Where are you from? What did you eat yesterday? It did not matter what the question was. The answer was what mattered. As long as they could answer, they were still with her. 2 hours and 30 minutes. 2 hours and 50 minutes. 2 hours and 58 minutes after they hit the water, a searchlight appeared on the horizon to the south. Then a second one. Then the sound of helicopter rotors, still distant but growing, the most beautiful sound Wave had ever heard in her life, and she had heard it many times. Coast Guard. Coast Guard helicopters. They are here. Wave your arms. Make noise. 79 people in the North Atlantic started waving and screaming. The helicopters came. Rescue swimmers dropped into the water. The process of pulling people out began, fastest first for those showing the worst hypothermia symptoms, systematic and professional, the Coast Guard crews doing exactly what they trained for. Wave was the last person they pulled out. She would not leave the water until she had confirmed with each rescue swimmer that their count was complete. When the final swimmer gave her the number, she stopped. 77 passengers and 2 crew, the swimmer said, shouting over the rotor noise. 79 total. All out. Wave floated on her back for a moment. The cold was deep in her bones now. She could not feel her feet. The sky was just beginning to lighten in the east, the very first gray suggestion of a dawn that was still an hour away. She looked up at the lightening sky and thought of David. Then she let them lift her out. The hospital in Bermuda was full of survivors from Atlantic Cargo Flight 229 for the next 2 days. All 79 people were treated for hypothermia of varying severity. 3 passengers had broken bones from the impact. 1 had a dislocated shoulder. 2 had concussions from being thrown against hard surfaces. 1 elderly woman had a mild heart event that was treated and resolved. Everyone lived. All 79 people who had been on that aircraft were alive and breathing and being treated in a hospital 48 hours after the impact. No other outcome of a hydraulic failure of this type had ever included any survivors at all. Every previous total hydraulic failure on a commercial aircraft had resulted in the loss of the aircraft and everyone aboard. Wave was treated for severe hypothermia and moderate frostbite in 3 toes on her right foot. She was kept for 24 hours. Before the warming blankets were fully in place, she had asked the nurse what happened to the aircraft. The nurse said it had sunk, as expected. She asked whether anything had been recovered from the cabin. The nurse said the aircraft had gone to the bottom of the Puerto Rico Trench and recovery was not possible at that depth. Wave lay very still for a long time after hearing that. She did not cry. She looked at the ceiling of the hospital room and was quiet for a long while. The wooden box with David's ashes was at the bottom of the deepest part of the Atlantic Ocean. 28,000 feet underwater. Irretrievable. She thought, I still kept the promise. I got him to the Atlantic. Just not quite to Ireland. She closed her eyes and slept for 11 hours. The NTSB investigation began the following week. Led investigator James Henderson, a methodical man who had spent 22 years investigating major aircraft accidents, interviewed Wave for 6 hours over 2 sessions. He had investigated 43 accidents in his career. He had never investigated one where everyone survived. He had certainly never investigated one where a passenger had walked into the cockpit and successfully ditched a commercial aircraft with total hydraulic failure. Lieutenant Commander Martinez, he said near the end of the second session, please help me understand what happened at 500 feet. Your descent rate had increased to 1,400 feet per minute. Captain Torres reported being concerned that the aircraft was dropping too fast. What were you expecting to happen? Ground effect, Wave said. At approximately 200 feet above water, the air caught between the wings and the ocean surface begins to compress. That compressed air creates lift. The larger the wings, the stronger the effect. The 767 has very large wings. I expected ground effect to slow our descent by 400 to 600 feet per minute. That is what happened. How certain were you that it would work? Not certain. Confident. There is a difference. Henderson wrote something. Do you consider yourself a hero? Wave was quiet for a moment. Heroes, she said, are people who do not come home. I came home. I used training that the Navy gave me, in a situation the Navy's training program was specifically designed for. I did my job. That is all. But you resigned from the Navy. Yes. And yet the training stayed with you. Training does not expire, Wave said. That is the point of training. 2 weeks after the accident, she was in San Antonio when her phone showed a number she recognized as a Navy exchange. She answered. Commander Martinez. Admiral Richardson's voice was exactly as she remembered it. Direct, measured, without ceremony. The Navy would like to discuss the possibility of your returning to active duty. Project Poseidon needs an experienced instructor. Specifically, it needs someone who has applied the program's techniques in a real emergency. Wave was sitting at her kitchen table. She looked out the window at the yard, at a city street she had been walking and driving through for 38 years. Sir. I resigned because I could not fly without seeing David Chen's face. And now? She thought about it honestly. Now I used skills that David and I developed together, techniques we perfected together on Chesapeake Bay, in a real aircraft falling toward a real ocean with real people in it. And those techniques worked. 77 people are alive right now who would not be alive if David and I had not put in the work. If I had walked away from the program after he died, those people would all be dead. She paused. I think you would want me to keep teaching it. So the next class learns it. And the class after that. So the next time an aircraft loses everything over deep water and there happens to be a trained Navy pilot on board, that pilot knows what to do. Is that a yes, Commander? That is a yes, Admiral. The cliffs of Moher stand 214 meters above the Atlantic Ocean on the western coast of County Clare in Ireland. They are enormous flat-topped cliffs of dark layered limestone that drop straight down into the sea, and the Atlantic crashes at their base continuously, and the wind at the top is constant and strong and smells of salt and distance. On clear days you can see the Aran Islands. On all days you can see the ocean stretching west to the horizon and beyond, uninterrupted all the way to North America. Wave stood at the cliff's edge on a Tuesday morning in September with a wooden box in her hands. Not the original box. That one was at the bottom of the Puerto Rico Trench, 28,000 feet underwater, in the darkest and coldest and most unreachable part of the Atlantic Ocean. But David's father had made a second box from the same wood, the same dimensions, the same smooth finish. And David's mother had provided what remained of his ashes, which she had kept. Wave had come to Ireland the way she had always intended to come. She was not alone. Captain Michael Torres stood to her left. First Officer Sarah Chin stood to her right. Behind them stood Maya Patel, who had flown in from Shannon where she was completing her final year at university, and 12 other survivors of Flight 229 who had made this journey together. They had come from Ireland and America and India and Germany and Canada, some of them people who had never met before that night over the Puerto Rico Trench and who were now connected by something that did not have a simple word. Torres had organized the trip. That felt right to him, as the captain. It was the last duty of his command. Wave looked out at the Atlantic. The same ocean. The same deep cold water that had tried to take all of them and had failed. In the morning light it was not black or threatening. It was gray-green and enormous and ancient, the waves moving in long slow swells from the west, crashing against the cliff face far below. She thought about what to say. She had been thinking about it for weeks and had not prepared anything, and standing here now she understood why. There was nothing to prepare. There was only what was true. David, she said, and her voice was quiet but it carried. The people around her went very still. You always wanted to see Ireland. Here it is. The cliffs are real. The ocean is real. The wind is yours. She stopped for a moment. I am sorry about the wooden box. I tried to get it here. The ocean had different plans. But you know about oceans and different plans better than most. Several people around her exhaled softly. The training we did together in Project Poseidon worked. You should know that. The techniques we developed, the ditchings we practiced in Chesapeake Bay in the rain in February when everyone else thought we were slightly insane, the 23 times I came down on the water in a disabled aircraft and thought about what you would improve for the next attempt, all of it worked. In the real world, in the dark, over the deepest ocean there is, it worked. 77 people are standing in their own lives right now because of what you and I figured out together. That is real. That is permanent. Nobody can take it away from you. She opened the box. Rest easy. Your ashes are in Ireland. I kept the promise. The wind off the Atlantic took the ashes the moment she tilted the box. They scattered and rose and thinned and disappeared into the sea air over the cliff edge, carried west over the ocean, gone. Nobody spoke for a while. Then Torres cleared his throat gently. She has not told the whole story, he said to the people around him, not quietly, in his natural speaking voice. About the call sign. About why Wave. I have been curious about this for 6 months. Wave looked at him. There was something in her expression that was not quite a smile but was close to one. Why do you want to know? Torres looked back at her. Because you told us in the water to keep talking. You told us that the talking was what kept us alive. So I am talking. And I want to know. A long pause. The sound of wind and ocean below. Waves keep coming, Wave said finally, simply, looking at the ocean. That is the whole thing. You can build walls and they will go around them. You can push them back and they return. You can knock them down 100 times and the 101st comes anyway. Not because they are violent. Not because they are angry. Just because that is what they are. That is what they do. They come back. She looked at the cliff edge where David's ashes had gone. I kept coming back. Even when I did not want to. Even when I thought there was nothing left to come back with. I came back to the cockpit that night when every quiet passenger part of me wanted to stay in seat 12B. I came back to the Navy when 8 months of being a civilian was the easier choice. I came back to Ireland when the easier thing was to say the box is gone and the promise cannot be kept. She paused. That is what waves do. They come back. I come back. Maya said, you saved 77 people. Wave turned to look at her. The young woman from County Clare who had raised her hand in the Atlantic Ocean in the dark and said yes when asked if she could lead. No, Wave said. We saved each other. I knew how to land. You all knew how to survive. Neither one works without the other. The landing means nothing if the people in the back panic and drown. The survival means nothing if the aircraft hits the water wrong and nobody gets out. It worked because everyone did their part. You did your part. Maya nodded, her eyes wet. Wave turned back to the ocean. She looked at it for a long time. The gray-green swells moving in from the west, the same swells that had been moving since long before any of them were born and would continue moving long after. The Atlantic. Deep and cold and permanent. Call sign Wave, she said quietly, to no one in particular or to everyone. Not today. Not ever. We do not stop. We do not quit. We come back. She stood at the edge of the cliffs of Moher with David's empty box held against her chest, looking out at the ocean, and the wind moved through her short dark hair, and the waves kept coming in below, relentless and steady and unstoppable, the way they always had and the way they always would. Behind her, the survivors of Atlantic Cargo Flight 229 stood together in the September morning, alive. All 79 of them, alive.